Welcome to episode 12 of the Just a Moment Ago podcast. Today I do have Amos back with me again, and I appreciate you being back again today, Amos.
Same here. It's always looking forward to a conversation and see where it's leading.
Right. So we're going to discuss semi-truck driver's diet today. The challenges of eating on the road, staying healthy, exercising, etc. You know, one thing about Amos is he's been on the road for a long time, and it's very clear he doesn't gain weight. He stays very skinny and healthy in that way, and his brother Floyd drives as well. He also does not gain weight very much. They both find ways to be pretty healthy on the road. And I do remember as a teenager going on the road, eating like buffet food, you know, the crispy chicken. At 14 years old, that stuff would put me to sleep at 14 years old. You know, so as an adult truck driver, it's got to be much harder to find quality food. So let's, what got you into being a truck driver? Let's go to the beginning and then go into.
Well, when I first started, I had two older brothers that were driving, and I really never thought about driving a semi. I have never even crossed my mind. I was working construction. I had left Wisconsin and went out to Washington, D.C., so I was a long ways from home.
Oh, really?
My brother was driving a semi and stopped in on a Sunday and to say hello, and I'm like, and I says, well, rather than be out here all by myself.
Right.
Because by that time, our older brother was working out there. That's how I ended up out there with him. And then he went and started driving semi. He was the first one that did it back in '87. So I decided that I would go with my brother and basically a year or two, just see what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
So needless to say, it was 33 years later. I'm still driving a truck. I'm still driving a semi.
33 years later. So, and at this point, you own your truck, correct? You are no longer driving for a company?
Right. We own the truck, yep.
You both own it, right? You're driving together. So running team, yep.
We bought our first truck in we bought our first truck in '94, and we owned it for 5 years, and then we sold it, and then we drove for a company for 21 years, and then 4 years ago we bought it.
Right. So you've been through some different experiences. Right. From then when you started to now, what does your pre-trip plan look like as far as bringing food along? How do you plan for your trips, back then and now?
Right. Well, back then it was not knowing anything about food. You'd go to the truck stop and where all the other truckers stop, and you'd walk in and look at the menu and decide what you're going to get, whether it was breakfast, what it was offered was, eggs and toast, hash browns, bacon, sausage, biscuits and gravy or whatever. I never eat no biscuits and gravy. Wasn't part of our diet, so I didn't eat stuff like that. I was just, and then, for dinner, the truck stops back then used to have pretty good buffets. I mean, much better than they have nowadays, but there was one brand in particular, the 76 truck stops that did a really good job. You'd have fried chicken and all kinds of vegetables and a fresh salad, which the salad back then actually looked good enough to eat. And that's part of where, it's been a while, but the lettuce in the last, 10 years just looks terrible. And I says, I'm not going to eat that, So I quit eating salads, 10 years ago, which was a big, not very good. But rather than eat lettuce that's all wilted and terrible looking.
Right.
But,
so when you first were driving, many years ago, you were more likely to eat at the restaurants and stuff because the food was better quality than it is now?
I didn't really know quality. We ate at the truck stops because that's where we could park, and they served, the food they did, which is pretty much truck stop food, or, so you're talking about, regular menu, like you walk into pretty much any other restaurant, full breakfast menu, and then about 11 o'clock they would put out their buffets. And then if you didn't hit that, you would maybe get something else that was on the menu that looked good. I would spend probably quite a while looking at the menu because it seemed like if you didn't, there's always something you'd miss.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to find things that are pretty good, so
right.
I like to look, and I would eat chicken parmesan for some reason after. This is like 3 or 4 years into it. I kind of liked that for a while, but it didn't last too long.
You're big on how food makes you feel, right? I know some people will eat no matter what it makes them feel, and they deal with it, but you would rather eat, and especially on the road, you feel good.
Yeah, at that point, I was more into taste. I I didn't really know the negative effects of food yet. So
Right.
if something tasted good, and it was I would eat it. Little did I know that most of it was fried in oils. They were horrible. I
Mm-hmm.
Back then it went from simple oils they were using 30, 40 years ago. They'd have to, if they were deep frying something, they'd have to change it out every 3 to 4 days,
Right.
at least once a week. And then they got into these synthetic oils where they could change them out some as much as 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
But needless to say, after 2 years, because I started in July of 1990, and then by November of 92, we weren't functioning real well. It was obviously affecting us a lot. We didn't know exactly what it was. Many years later, we finally found out about the oils and said, well, if them oils were as bad as what we now know, then that's the reason why your body just became more lethargic,
Right.
and just became less and less, able to function as a human being. Because it gotten so bad that we weren't functioning. We didn't feel like we could go back into anything else. Our health had slipped. Our strength was gone. In fact, I got off the road in '92, in November of '92, and then did local work. Drove a milk truck and picking up at the farms until the fall of '94. So that was almost a 2-year break.
Right.
And I had really not done that well for 2 years. I mean, I was working part-time.
So the first 2 years on the road, eating all that just for taste really drained you. You actually had to come off the road for 2 years.
Yep.
And what did you change your diet at home then?
Oh, at home it was fine because we would
I'm saying you weren't eating out or anything.
Oh,
You
no.
were eating at
Yeah,
home,
yeah.
making meals, trying to
Yeah.
be more healthy
we would at that point we didn't know much about food either, but we were eating what we normally would at home. So we would go to the local butcher shop, get a couple pounds of hamburger.
Right.
We would grill out. We would if we had spaghetti, we would have a spaghetti dinner. We would heat up the hot water and drop that in there, brown the hamburger. Breakfast was eggs, and
But making it at home, you don't eat all that oils and all the stuff they're giving you.
We were using butter and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So surprisingly, by the fall of it took until the fall of '94 for me to really start to feel like, oh wow, I'm actually, once again functioning as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, my brother that I'm working with now, Floyd, is 4 years older, and he was talking about getting his own truck and getting his own company and his own authority. And I said, well, why don't you just go work for somebody, what they call a owner operator? They'll lease their truck onto somebody.
Okay.
Figure get your feet wet a little bit. So that's what happened. We bought the truck in '94, in November of '94, and then for the next 4 years we worked for somebody as an owner operator, which means that they would contract you.
As a
team? We were a
team?
team, yeah. And the way we ran team was a little different than everybody else because the only reason we ran team was because the company had schedules that, you would have to run 700 miles in a period of, whatever time it was. We walked in and talked to the owner, and he's like, well, we leave Wisconsin Friday night. Friday afternoon, we get loaded. We're in LA Monday morning. And then we roll up the coast about 300 miles and load up our produce. And we usually get loaded by Tuesday morning, and then we're back here Thursday morning. We're like, I don't think so. I think we'll be running team.
Right.
So for us, it was like, 800 miles a day. We would get loaded Friday night. We would run 600 miles out into South Dakota and then go to sleep. And the next day we'd make it into Utah, and then, which is Saturday. And then on Sunday afternoon, we would drive on down to Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
And the one advantage was that if everything went good, you would get unloaded Monday. You would bounce up the coast, which was a nice drive. I mean, it was usually out of LA by noon. And then you would drive the 250, 275, whatever it was, up to where they have the produce in Northern California, Salinas, California area. Then you would check in, and you would have like 4 or 5 different places to go to, and you would check in, tell them you're there, and then when their product was ready, they would either call you or you would get in contact with them, and it would take until, this is 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You'd roll into town, and within 2 hours, you might have the first pick on, and then a couple hours later, and then usually by midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, you'd have the last one on. I was sleeping because my brother Floyd would run the night shift a lot of times and do the loading. So I'd wake up about 6 in the morning, and Floyd would be just rolling out of town. He's like, "Yep, we're loaded." And the first thing we would do is go up to a really good restaurant that we had out there, and just north of Hollister, California. It's actually just a little bit, maybe 20 miles north of there. And we enjoyed our really good breakfast, and that was like a really good spot. We really seeked out better food, way back then.
That's good.
We did not want to enjoy, just greasy something. We wanted something good.
So from your first 2 years, you were aware that you had to seek out, because you're much further into your driving now at that point.
The first 2 years, we did not know.
I'm saying, but now at this point later in your driving, you know that from your past experience, you need to find better food, not just for taste, but
2 years at home. And then when we went back on the road, we were definitely looking for better food, anything that was better.
Mm.
But the funniest thing about that restaurant was, I'm not going to remember the name of it, but it had this waiter that was in waiting for many, many years. And he was famous for it. They had articles written about him, but they put your coffee cup down on a saucer. It was upside down.
Right.
And with one flip, that cup would fly up in the air and land, because he would catch it on the way up. Maybe as it coming back down, he would move that saucer and catch it. But he could flip that cup in the air and catch that cup and then pour you a cup of coffee. And it's like, wow, that's incredible,
Did you ever see him miss it?
He was known as the flipper. No, he'd been doing it for like 35, 40 years. So he
really had it down. Yeah, he was flipping it perfect.
There were a few people that could do it, but yeah, it was amazing. Anybody that knows the truck, anybody that knows the road will know exactly where I'm talking about there.
I'm sure you run into a few things like that on the road, though, where people have little gimmicks like that too.
Oh, yeah. That was probably the most unique one, though. But,
yeah.
But then at that point, running the team, there was we talked to the customers back in Minneapolis or Wisconsin where we were delivering, and they said, well, whenever they had us on the load, me and my brother Floyd, it says they weren't too worried that the load ain't going to get there by Thursday morning. So, because when a solo would get loaded late, they would probably have to deliver Friday. There was no way they could make it on Thursday. So at that point, we would roll it back, pretty much straight through. Still stop for breakfast. I mean, we weren't going to drive. We drove as far as we could and then slept if we got tired. But then it was only 3 days. So, and then when we got back, delivered Thursday, like I said, when they said that when they knew that we were on the load, that they didn't have to worry about running down to the wholesale market and buying a bunch of lettuce, because the lettuce is going to be on their dock.
That's good. So they trusted you.
Yeah. So that, but then when we got home on Thursday, we would schedule to load back on Monday. So we would come home, we'd deadhead about 150 miles back to Wisconsin and be home Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then reload on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was just switched. We would leave on Monday, be out there like on, Thursday, and then reload and be back the following Monday.
Yeah.
And then,
go ahead.
Then just reverse, take the 3 days off, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, leave on Friday. And that was why we did not work very hard. We ran 16, 17,000 miles a month, which is a lot of miles. But we did it in such a way that we only worked 7, 8 days about 8 days at a time, and then had 3 days off. So
you were also getting stuff there on time too. You guys were trusted, and you weren't working hard, but getting stuff there when it needs to be. But how does that, always making sure to be on time, how does that affect when you stop or where you stop to eat?
Well, that's
are you eating in the road or on, in the truck, or how are you handling your diet at that point?
No, we did not. We did not really do well with taking food with. We weren't big on fixing a sandwich, or a lot of guys that were fixing sandwiches. In our opinion, they were just burning themselves out. So we actually did a very good job of of seeking out places that would have, whatever food it was. If it was a roast beef dinner, like mashed potatoes and gravy, and that was one thing we really liked. We had, by that time you pretty much knew your route, so we'd stop in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and there was a couple spots in Wyoming for breakfast. Utah, there was a really good restaurant down on I-15 that we counted on, and then there was another one in California just before you get down there, and then even the most truck stops were still pretty good. Their cooks were pretty good. We really saw a turn for the worse. Sometime after that, we had already sold our truck, in 98, drove for this company for quite a few years. That's when the industry really seemed to, go downhill. With the truck stops got rid of their restaurants, putting in more fast food, and the restaurants that were there were still 2 or 3, 4 or 5 of them on your route, but you'd have to drive. More likely, if you because we would drive until we get to that restaurant for breakfast.
You'd go out of your way, you mean, or
we would at night we would try to get as close to that restaurant as possible so we could get, our good breakfast.
So the ones on your route, you knew how far you had to get to that restaurant.
And that might be leaving Wisconsin and making sure you're in Kansas or Oklahoma, 500-600 miles down the road by the next morning, because you don't want to start, having to drive still 200 miles to get to have your breakfast, because the rest of them, you knew that if you stopped there, it'd be a waste of time.
Right.
You feel terrible. You feel horrible, and it just wasn't a good day.
Right. And one thing I think that's good about you and running with Floyd, your brother, that you guys have done it for so long,
right,
is you know each other's habits pretty well. You're not one's hungry and you don't run into one's hungry and the other's not that often. You guys are planning to eat at the same time. You're going to the same spot. You have the same thoughts.
Right. Yeah. That I have no problem with that, because Floyd's always hungry, and I just eat, morning and night. Sometimes nowadays we eat about twice a day at least. Back then it was probably, maybe 3 times a day, which was too much at the time. But
you'd stop younger. 3 times a day.
Back in the early 90s, we did. We'd eat. We might eat breakfast, and then we might stop for 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock for dinner, and then we might stop again by 6, 7 o'clock for something to eat for supper. Yeah. But when you're younger, of course, your metabolism was better, and you probably were hungry at that time.
Right. And if you said back then you weren't eating the best quality food, but...
Well, the first 2 years were definitely not, because we had no idea what to eat, and walk in and get whatever it was, 2 eggs, hash browns, and then it's just grilled in the wrong oil.
Right. Well, right, and it still is, So now, at this point, have you changed your diet on the road? Other than just driving really far to one restaurant, is that what you're doing?
We're still doing that. We plan our trips we will drive until midnight if we have to get to a spot that has good food, so that we can wake up at 7 in the morning and eat breakfast.
Are you bringing anything with?
Not really, no.
Not at all?
Not really, no.
Just maybe some supplements and vitamins, things like that, or?
We kind of don't do a lot of that either. We've done some of that in the past, but it seems like getting a good night's sleep is probably number one.
Right, for sure.
That's
rest.
Number one. If you do that, you're gonna maintain your energy better. With a good diet. But we found out that if we don't get enough sleep, it doesn't matter what you do. You're gonna get tired.
Are you often getting good sleep in the truck? Because you're sleeping while it's moving a lot, right?
No, pretty much every night we shut down, at either by 10, 11 o'clock, and then the truck's sitting until 6 in the morning.
Oh, wow. So running team, you guys are still stopping at night. You're just giving each other an easier day and scheduling your load so you have more time to get there.
After 33 years of driving, we're not going to drive 650, 700 miles, 800 miles by ourselves. So we're running 350 miles, letting the other guy take over running 350 miles. And
right.
We're 14-hour days, and I drove 350 miles. My brother drives 350 miles, and we're not wore out.
So you can plan a day with 2 people as one, and that does help you to not get wore out. That's really good. That's good thinking as a team when you're this far in,
Right. every now and then there'll be a load that will have, the right rate on it, and they're like, well, picks up Saturday in Washington State, or Friday or Saturday, and it's got to be in Virginia, 72 hours later, or just under that. And we got it down to where we figure out the total time. On average, if it's 40 mile an hour, we know we got time to stop to eat.
Right.
If it gets close to 50 mile an hour, for example, so it's 3,000 miles, you've only got 60 hours. So that's 50 miles every hour you got to make. So if you drive 70 miles, then you'll stop for dinner 8 hours later, you lose an hour. Well, your 70 mile an hour average dropped to 58 mile an hour average. So if we get a load that's scheduled at more than 45,
that's how you're planning
that's how we plan it.
That's awesome.
If it's more than 45, we don't even want that. We want about 40 at the most.
Right.
33 to 35, because that gives you 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours throughout the day. It gives you plenty of time to stop to eat, and it still gives you 5 hours of sleep in there.
That's great thinking. That, I mean, and you've been driving a long time, so you've been able to work this stuff out too. Where a new driver is not going to be thinking of it like that.
No, they
it really shows experience.
When you talk about teams that are running, full-fledged team, they'd be probably laughing, because they're like, we average 50, 55 mile an hour. That's how their dispatches are. It's like, they pick up a load, it's paced so bad that they literally, they have some time. I can't speak for all of them.
Well, with experience, you're not letting that happen to you. You're not letting yourself get burnt out like that. Them other guys are going to be burnt out, and you're going to feel better than they do. So
that's after, after many years, like I say, I have to compliment Floyd on that, because he does not like to run day and night. I don't either. I mean, I'm the kind of, on my side, I will tell him, need to shut down earlier so I can get a better night's sleep.
Right.
He will have a tendency of running till midnight and then sleep until 8 o'clock in the morning, because he sleeps fine in those hours. But I'm like, if I don't shut down early, I don't get a good night's sleep. So
yeah,
that's probably the only difference between us, is where I like to shut down a little bit sooner than he does.
Right. So how do you handle your coffee and energy drink intake? Because I know that you're a lot like me with that. If you get the wrong one, it will mess your day up. So if you do get the wrong one, how do you handle that, or how do you make sure to find the right ones that don't hurt you?
Well, we've always been just a straight up coffee. That was pretty much the only thing I, would drink. So it was coffee, and it was usually, 1 or 2 cups with breakfast, and then you found a good spot that had a really good coffee, you would grab one to go and drink that throughout the day. And that was pretty much it. You wouldn't drink coffee all day long, and you might have coffee with your dinner at night or whatever, which was kind of weird, but we always didn't really think about it that much. But we're finally becoming aware that maybe it's not such a good idea to drink coffee all day long. But we didn't overdo it. We had a couple cups, but never really got into the energy drinks. I've seen plenty of people do it, and I didn't really. I know I bought a couple of them, like a Red Bull, or it took me years to buy a Monster. I was not sold on the marketing. I wasn't sold on anything. I finally, like I say, I drank some Red Bulls, maybe like 1 or 2 of them. It wasn't very many, and they worked fairly good. I mean, they would actually, you could feel more alert on certain days when you might have drove for a couple hundred miles, but long term, I just wasn't really depending on them. I didn't really get myself to the point where I depended on them. But the few times I did drink the Monsters, it seemed like the overwhelming sugar content was just not worth it. I mean, the initial functioning, the initial effect you would get might get you by for, so you're not going to sleep. You're going to be awake, and if you're not used to drinking them, you're going to be, pretty well wired. You're not wired, but you're going to be able to drive for, all night long if you want. If you've been sleeping, half the day anyway.
Right.
Because you're not going to drive all night long if you haven't slept during the day. So no, it was took me many years to really understand water. I didn't drink any water.
Right. That's actually what I was going to ask you next was, are you keeping bottles of water in the truck or a jug of water, anything like that for hydration at least, if you're not keeping
We have
food?
been for the last 8 years, but the first, you know, 20 years is where I didn't drink a whole lot of water.
Right.
Number one, you get to a place, the water at the restaurants was, full of chlorine. I'm not going to drink that.
Right. Well, of course, no.
And I go out there and I look at the bottled water, and I've learned that it really ain't worth drinking. So I'm like, I'm not going to drink that. So since I wasn't going to drink that, I mean, I didn't drink any water, which was bad. But I drank maybe half a glass every now and then here and there. But that was part of the reason why, we were not doing so well healthy wise. But my brother, on the other hand, Floyd, he would always love his water.
Yeah, he's been into water for years.
Water.
Yeah.
He would drink a gallon, every 2 days. I mean, he'd buy it in jugs and be drinking it all day long.
Mm-hmm.
And he did very well. His energy stayed good. He was happy and it functioned very well. Unlike most truckers, because he was really the one that didn't like to run more than 500 miles a day. So he would start in the morning and run a couple 100 miles and stop for dinner. But at the end of the day, he would not pace himself more than 450, 500 miles a day.
Right.
Yeah.
Just keeping himself from getting burnt out. He knows what his body's limits are.
Yeah. And the amazing thing is the company we drove for the 21 years in between owning a truck in 94 through 98, and then the company we drove for, their schedules were okay. I mean, they weren't like super fast, but we finally got it down to where we would only leave on certain days with certain loads. Because loads that were loading and didn't have enough time on it. For example, if you loaded on a Monday morning and you had to be in Virginia by Wednesday morning, it's pretty well, you don't have a lot of time.
No, right, for sure.
So if we would leave on a Sunday and have to be out there Wednesday, that was fine because it gives us enough time to.
Well, that's a whole nother, that's another day.
Sunday night or whatever, or we'd. So there was loads, there was a couple loads where there's one right out of Wisconsin here, Eau Claire of all places, and it would be a place that would supposed to have you loaded by 10 in the morning, and you were supposed to have until 10 o'clock, which is 3 days later. So you're talking about Monday to Thursday, which is 72 hours to get to Southern California. Well, when they didn't get you loaded until like 4 in the afternoon, 5 in the afternoon, which happened every now and then. Now legally you can still make it.
Yeah.
Because you're like an electronic log, but you got to run. In that time period, I ran 7-8 hours, took a half-hour break because you have to do that mandatorily, and then finished my 11 hours. So you got 650 miles in. You haven't stopped a whole lot. Your body is starting to really tense up.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're off duty, sleeper berth for 10 hours. And then you do that same thing the next day. You maintain that speed that you're not going to give up more than a half an hour of stopping. I mean, you're going to stop maybe 5 minutes somewhere for check your tires or something like that.
And that's going to affect your diet. I mean, you're not going to be able to stop and eat. You don't have anything in the truck.
That's the point where you made sure you had your breakfast in the morning because you didn't have time to stop after that.
Mm-hmm.
But you're able to make the schedule. You're able to make the delivery. You show up like an hour early. But 2 or 3 trips like that over a period of 3 or 4 months, that had happened, that it was forced you to run that hard. It was just not worth it. I mean, your body was so beat up.
Right.
And we recognized that it just wasn't worth it. So we scheduled ourselves around and said, no, we're not leaving on Monday. We'll leave on Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
When you load us on Thursday, we'll have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday
right
out there. And then we'll unload Monday morning, and then we'll be back in 4 or 5 days.